Hi, I'm Mark.
And I'm Tatenda. Welcome to the Cool Fucking Tech Podcast.
An in-depth look at the latest and best tech startups led by underrepresented founders.
We're interviewing some of the most successful tech startups about how they aim to change the world.
Today we're talking to Vessel Athletics. We're bringing on the founders, Jasmine and Jalen.
We've been following Vessel Athletics, and we think that they're addressing a very interesting problem within the running space.
Welcome, Vessel Athletics. We want to learn more about your startup, and we're hoping you guys could just introduce yourself really quick and some background on your extremely cool athleisure company.
Sure. Thank you, Mark and Stenda, for having us. Super happy to be here. My name is Jasmine. I am one of the founders of Vessel Athletics, and I guess we'll share a little bit more about Vessel Athletics. I'll let Jalen introduce himself first.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Mark and Tatenda, for having us today. We really appreciate you guys reaching out to us. My name is Jalen. I'm co-founder of Vessel Athletics. We started Vessel Athletics just a few years ago, and we'll chime into that a little bit later during the podcast. But yeah, really excited to share more about our product with all of you. And yeah.
We're really excited to have you guys here, especially for our first podcast. So without further ado, we wanted to just kind of get into what you guys are doing, what problems you're solving in the space.
Sure. So yeah, Vessel Athletics is the best way to put it. We are a technical apparel and hydration brand for runners. That's our core customer. And essentially the first product that we're launching with is called the Hydra Shirt. And so the Hydra Shirt is basically an activewear shirt that integrates a removable hydration pack. And the whole concept is creating a product that allows runners or even other athletes to easily carry water with them on their runs or physical activities without the need to hold a water bottle in their hand or wear one of those heavy hydration backpacks. A good example is maybe like a Camelback. That's kind of a common name that a lot of people know right now. Right. Or even there's the water belt too, which is something that kind of goes around a runner's waist, and it's also very flimsy. So we're trying to basically create just a lighter, more comfortable way to hydrate. And we can go also into the nitty gritty around what inspired us to start this, how the idea first came to be, and all that.
That would be something great. Sort of like the motivation and the background to starting Vessel Athletics. Like, for example, like are the two of you runners? Like, what's your vested interest in this?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. So first and foremost, we are definitely runners. I have been running for a little bit over 5 years now. And just, I always like to bring it back to kind of early childhood days for me. And then of course, Jalen has his own entrepreneurial journey. But for me, at an early age, I kind of was always interested in business and entrepreneurship. And that was primarily because my parents were entrepreneurs. They were small business owners. And then, at an early age, I remember reading one of the first business books I ever read was this book called Start Something That Matters by the founder of Tom's. His name is Blake McCoskey. And that really opened my eyes to what we now know today as social entrepreneurship. So just really opened my eyes to a world of business that just goes beyond the monetary aspect, the aspect of starting a business to make a livelihood, but also starting a business to create change. So that really just interested me at an early age. And, went through high school, kind of dabbled in different forms of social good, but not really entrepreneurship. And then I entered college, and around that same time, I went to San Jose State. And that first semester too, it was a lot just adapting, kind of getting used to the new environment that I was in, as most college students do. And one thing about San Jose State is they're more known as a commuter school. So that first semester too, it was really hard for me to personally meet a lot of people. I felt like I was just kind of going to class, not really meeting other people. But one thing that always stayed pretty consistent for me was just physical activity, sports. The time I was going to the gym, not really meeting people. So I one day came across this ad for a local 5K, or it's actually an 8K that was going on in San Jose. So I decided to sign up. And that's how my passion, my love for running started. It was initially just signing up for this race, saying what the heck, I don't really like running, but let's see what happens. Really loving that feeling, that environment, that welcoming community that entails the running community. And then just wanting to see, what more how much more can I run after that? And yeah, just slowly building my way up to running longer distances. And then now by this point, I was kind of more of an avid runner, and I went through the process of, trying out different hydration products, because as I was running these longer distances, I was like, okay, I need to start thinking about hydration. How am I going to be carrying my hydration? How much am I going to be drinking? All of that. And so I went through a series of, buying different hydration products, not really being satisfied with any of them. And that's kind of when, just on one run in particular, I had this idea of, what if we could just put one of those water packs inside of a shirt? And it just kind of spiraled down this obsession of, actually, this might actually be able to work. And so, yeah, we've been, developing this product for several years now. But that's kind of just like an overview of how the idea initially came to be. And of course, my own just passion and interest for business.
Right on.
For me, quite naturally, I think entrepreneurship has always been a part of my life. So growing up, I was heavily into sports, just like Jasmine had mentioned. I played football growing up. I also played basketball and soccer. And during my free time, funny enough, I was always looking for ways to just make an extra buck. Growing up, not having a ton of money myself, I was always just, trying to sell old clothing in my closet. And I think the first item I ever sold was, I guess my mom, was cleaning out her closet as well. And she had some purses that she was no longer wearing. And she's like, hey, you should list these on eBay, see if you can sell them. And that, I was never, keen on using eBay before then. So it was my first time ever listing something on there. And sure enough, 2 days later, ended up selling the bag for, like $180. And to a kid, that's a lot of money. And I'm like, holy crap, like, this is awesome. And I go back and tell my mom the news, and she's even more happy, right? Because she gets all the money herself. So she breaks me off a few dollars, right? But she's like, hey, like, here's 2 or 3 more purses that are in my closet. Try and sell those, and it ends up creating like a domino effect where I just, end up selling pretty much all of her stuff that she no longer wears, all of my stuff. And then the word kind of spread to like her colleagues, and, colleagues started having me sell their things. So that's what really opened my eyes to just the world of, entrepreneurship, and really being able to, create income, passive income for yourself. And, it just was amazing to me. And at the time, like I mentioned, I was into sports. Another sport I had picked up was skateboarding. So I was constantly upset with the skateboards I'd buy from my local skate shop because they'd break, after 2 to 3 days of skating them. And it was a common complaint that I'd hear.
What kind of skating were you doing? Like, I've never heard of a board breaking after 2 or 3 days.
It wasn't anything crazy. But just in the area that I was in, my local skate shop, they created their own like label brand or own label decks. So they did, it was like the skate shop was called New Generation, I believe, but they created their own brand of skateboards that were slightly cheaper than quote unquote the name brand boards. But whatever manufacturer they went with just wasn't up to par with the standard skateboards that you'd buy. And then also, many kids, as I mentioned, can't afford to go out and spend $60 on a board every single time. So they gravitated towards the cheaper alternative, which wasn't that great. And I was like, man, I can do this better pretty much. And, I went out to seek manufacturers for skateboards, and found a few online. They had excellent reviews. I ended up, after not only finding the manufacturer, I was like, okay, how can I like create graphics? What can I do to go about, addressing the issue around the decks breaking all the time? And luckily, I knew a lot of friends at school that were just into like graphic design and also photography and things of that, just in that realm. And they, I had people offer up, designs and drawings. But for my initial design, what I ended up going with was I literally sat down with Adobe Illustrator, and, created like what I think to this date is still like a decent, okay graphic. But back then it was like, oh my goodness, like this is crazy. I can't believe I did this. And I think that gave me a lot more satisfaction just creating it myself. But when it comes to like addressing the issue with, decks breaking all the time, I had looked into, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Invisible Shield, but the screen protectors that you'd wrap your products with, technology with, and it's supposed to be like industrial grade screen protectors pretty much. I reached out to them or a manufacturer of theirs and tried to find if, they could potentially wrap a skateboard in the plastic shield. And long story short, that was not a great idea. But I think the process and the point of me bringing that up is just the process of me like figuring out, and it kind of goes back to like even me like selling, my mom's purses and, shoes in my like closet, right? Is that like that piece of, I guess, intellect and just me like going down that thought process was always just spinning. Those gears were always turning. And I think entrepreneurship is something that's kind of innate, it's very natural. And it's kind of carried, I've carried that mindset with me even to today. So when I made it to San Jose State and I met Jasmine through a business program, and she told me, hey, I'm doing this really cool product in the running space. Me no longer being active, playing football, like I was growing up, was like, I was like, wow, this is a great way for me to, get back in shape, but also continue down that path of entrepreneurship.
A lot of really key points you guys are bringing up about like a culture of entrepreneurship, especially the unsung heroes of small businesses, and then also the spirit of innovation. And we kind of wanted to hone in on some of those things about the innovation aspect and then come back to the whole diversity aspects of it. But I'm very fortunate enough to have seen you guys regularly innovate your product over the past couple years. And I just wanted to see if you guys could explain to us more in the audience about what it took to go from prototype to a more and more and more refined product that you guys have today.
Yeah, so I'll kind of also walk you through the beginnings of prototyping and all that. So after I came up with the initial concept of, hey, let's put water inside of a shirt and see what happens. It was cool because around that same time I was taking these entrepreneurship business classes in college, and so one of the things they told us from an early, or very early on is, hey, just because you have an idea doesn't mean you're going to, doesn't necessarily mean you're solving a problem. Doesn't mean anyone's going to give you money in exchange for that idea. So you need to go out and validate that idea. You got to go out and figure out, is this something that you're actually, that, people would actually pay for? Are you actually solving people's needs? So, that led me to just going out to local trails in my area, local races, going up to people who had some of these competitor products and asking them, hey, what do you like about this product? What do you not like? What do you think of this idea? Things like that. What would you like to see in this product? So that really, led me down the right path of like, okay, yes, clearly it's very clear that I'm not the only one struggling with this hydration issue with running. So yeah, I think there is room to create a better product. And now the tricky part was prototyping. So getting an MVP, a minimum viable product. And so it was trickier because I have no design background whatsoever. At that time, that was very early on. So Jalen hadn't even joined. I hadn't even met him yet. So I was like, all right, well, what do I do? So there was this club on campus at San Jose State called Ideas, and I joined that, kind of pitched my idea in the club, and so the one particular design student actually approached me, was interested in helping me out. So he and I kind of worked on some of those very, very early on, rough-looking prototypes, and it started down that path, just doing testing. All right, this works, this doesn't work, changing things. All right, let's get this tested on someone else. Then I eventually found a seamstress in my area. And it's funny because seamstresses aren't actually really known to, be able to develop prototypes, but she's a very gifted seamstress. So she was awesome. She's helped us so much. And so we oftentimes would bring her a bunch of just fabric and zippers and materials and say, hey, can you put this together? And she would do an amazing job. And then at a certain point, I realized, all right, this product can only go so far with just, me and a student and a seamstress, and then eventually Jalen, because I think he had joined by that point. We need to bring in some actual professional expertise, a real designer. So we've worked with several designers up until this day now. And typically the process of what it takes is like a designer, we go to a designer, we share what we want to build, we share our prototypes and all that. And they actually they put together something that's called a tech pack. So that's basically what you send to a manufacturer. And that shows the manufacturer all the instructions, everything that goes into creating a product. And because our product, our apparel, our garment is a little bit more technical, it's definitely taken, a little bit longer than we ever anticipated, around the design process, testing things out, making sure that this is the right fabric, that the shirt's breathable, that, the hydration pack, the water in the hydration pack is staying cool. So many different things to consider, but that's kind of been the process that we've gone down. And Jalen, feel free to add too. There's so much we could cover on this topic.
What was the turning point in going from prototyping to, oh my God, this is what the product is going to look like?
And I think it's a moving target, right? Initially, we envisioned, the product looking a certain way. And then once it got to that point, we're like, scratch that, this is not going to address what we're trying to get it to address. So it's going to look like this. And we haven't gotten it to, that point that we've set out for it. But once we get there, I guarantee, there will be more changes we have to implement. So I think there's always going to be room for improvement. Our most important concern right now is just addressing the big three for us. And that's just functionality, the product being lightweight, the product being slosh resistant. So, as long as we're hitting on those 3 points, I think for an initial launch, that'll be like a great starting point. But we'll always have room to improve and get better.
Follow up on the sloshing. How did you solve that problem?
That happens to be the most difficult thing that we've run into around, around creating this product. So, initially what we had thought of is like, let's incorporate kind of this elastic strap that's already attached to the shirt, and it's meant to act kind of like a belt. And so you could adjust it according to your waist, and it's going to keep the hydration pack stabilized. And so it was effective at keeping the hydration pack stabilized. But the issue that we ran into there was that, the weight of the hydration pack, it's about 32 ounces, so 1 liter. It was actually dragging the shirt down. So, the fabric's obviously this lightweight fabric, breathable fabric. So, of course, like you can imagine, it got uncomfortable. If there was a drag on the back of the shirt, then there was a rise at the front. And it was kind of like this high rise around your neck, and it was uncomfortable. And so that, led us back to the drawing board. It showed us, okay, we need to think of a different way that we can stabilize the hydration pack. So we had to go back with our designer, work on, brainstorming new ideas, and did minor tests around that. And we came down to this new concept, which is basically the best way to put it is like, and Jalen, you might have a better way to explain this, but I like to say it's like we've integrated kind of like a harness-like system within the shirt. It's still a shirt. And the concept is similar, is the same. It's just like you can adjust it, according to your body size, your chest and all that. And so that's kind of where we are right now. And we're super excited. We've been waiting for samples of this new redesign for the last several months now, which has been another pain in the butt. So we got word from our designer that the factory should be done next week. And then so we'll be probably seeing those new samples in the next 2 weeks.
Exciting. So I've got one more question before Mark hates me for hogging the mic. He's staring at me right now like, come on, not even, man. Right. Like we're in this together. But how are you, I guess, thinking about protecting your IP when it comes to designing this anti-slosh feature? Because I feel like this is where your buck is going to be at.
Yeah. So we actually do have a provisional patent on this. We did file something back in December of 2020. So the shirt is patented. It typically takes about a year, so a year and a half for the patent office to actually issue the patent. But yeah, that was kind of a big something that was really exciting, kind of getting to work with a lawyer, seeing like what about the design we could patent. Yeah. And yeah, that was awesome too. So definitely that's been also a very important component of this product that we're creating.
Excellent.
One of the key skills you guys are referring to is grit. And I really admire the kind of grit to continually innovate, optimize and prioritize different product features. And I think it's something that's truly unsung about minority entrepreneurship. And a part of that is also knowing how to build the team and navigating that whole 0 to 1 space. I'm actually really excited in part to talk to you guys because, you guys are still very early stage. So I was hoping, Jasmine, you could talk to us a bit about going from idea to building the team and how you outsource different work. We've already talked about seamstresses, lawyers, adding team members. So I was like hoping you could walk us through that thought process that you had there.
I feel like a lot of times, especially when it comes to, just these early first time founders, is like we often get caught in this loop of, thinking we need to go raise funding from outside investors right before we even have a product or before we have customers. And I think at one point, earlier on, I was like, I think I'm going to need to do that, but realize early on too that, hey, actually this is, in addition to not having a ready finished product, not having customers, we're also creating a physical product. We're not necessarily a tech product. So scaling this is going to be a little bit more challenging. So we really need to actually go out and validate that this is, something people would want before we even think about raising outside funding. And so, obviously since that kind of revelation, I've realized we need to just bootstrap this company. And that's been a challenge within itself because R&D is just so expensive and it's timely, and of course paying, working with contractors, designers, that's also expensive. So we both, Jalen and I, have full-time jobs, and my job personally funds Vessel Athletics right now. So that's been one thing. But on the topic of bootstrapping, that that, Mark, to your point, like that requires us to be scrappy. It requires us to be creative. It requires us to think about, hey, what we're spending our money on, making sure we're not spending it on stupid shit, so things like that. One thing that I always like to bring up when Jalen and I have our things is this question of, what is one thing that we can do to advance the product forward, even though we are running into some of these design and production challenges that are kind of out of our control. So we try to bring up these questions on a weekly basis to get creative, think about different ways that we can, push this product forward and finally be able to launch. So hopefully that answers your question. I feel like I went down another rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, we're here to listen. You guys are like the definition of a lean startup, as is often the case when you guys are really making something big and starting off. But one thing I wanted to also talk about was that decision making between bootstrapping and seeking funding, and kind of honing in on that money conversation, because often a lot of startups fail because of how they get funded. And you guys are taking a very different route than, I would say 80% of Silicon Valley startups. But at the same time, a much more normal route for minority entrepreneurship. So can you walk us through that decision-making process a bit?
Yeah. So for our product too, it's, we've had our eyes set on launching on Kickstarter initially. So that's going to be our kind of first way to get out to the market and then get that initial funding. That funding is going to go towards production, getting our first, product made. And, that's part of the reason why, just not wanting to take the traditional VC route, why give up a part of our company before we've even launched, to someone who it's not that easy to find, investors, especially investors who have a similar vision to you. So that was just my thought process there.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, again, we're not the traditional Silicon Valley tech startup. We're not a tech startup, so it's a little bit different. But I often tell, I've helped run some accelerator programs, and I often tell other founders too, is like, hey, don't get caught, even though you're developing a tech startup, don't get caught up in the mindset that you have to raise funding. I mean, I understand some companies have to raise funding depending on what product they're developing, but not all. There's a way for you to keep some of your equity earlier on, develop your product, being scrappy, and then get customers early on. And then maybe once you're ready to scale, once you are more of a kind of ironed out founder, then you can think about raising funding. But that's kind of been my thought process there. And it's honestly just come from like hearing out mentors and listening to stories of kind of like startups that haven't done so well getting funding,
I want to take us back to something that you mentioned here about getting your product out. Like, I'm interested to know what you're thinking about as far as marketing the product, as well as who you're looking at as your initial customers and how you're planning on growing from there.
Yeah. So early on too, when I initially came up with the concept of this product, it was like, hey, this product can be sold to runners, to bikers, to hikers and so on. But, early on in a lot of startups, especially consumer-based companies, it's really important to look at a small niche audience, because that makes it a lot more easier to focus on your marketing, to really make sure that you're creating an awesome product that's going to help a small little group. And then you can think about expanding. So that eventually led us down the path of figuring out, well, hey, we're runners, we experience this issue as runners. Let's focus on runners. And even with runners, it's like the running community is so broad. And so we had to go even more focused there. And now we're primarily focusing on selling this product initially to, I would say, your half marathoner and your marathoner is our ideal target. And there's so many different features that we could play around with. We're also looking at like creating a product eventually for specifically ultra runners or trail runners. And
yeah, I was about to say David Goggins right there.
Yeah.
Like, that's like the first person that came to mind. Like, you should talk to him. Like, he would know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so like the difference between a traditional, like for example, the difference between a marathon runner and maybe a trail runner is like trail runners or ultra runners, they're going out running in trails for hours at a time. And, they're also thinking about like safety. So what safety products do they need to carry with them? Sometimes some of them like to use trekking poles. Some of them like to bring food and gels and other forms of that sort. And marathon runners, sometimes, they're more on the road. So they're, probably sometimes running more on a safer street, safer trail and whatnot. So yeah, thinking about things like that it's definitely kind of, once we decided, all right, we want to initially target half marathoners, it allowed us to really focus in on the features that we're developing for this initial Hydro Shirt 1.0.
Yeah, and just to add to that, one thing we've observed within the fashion industry and the modeling industry is just lots of times people who are modeling, new clothing releases for these companies are your, if you were to picture, right, a model walking down a runway, it's going to be, a slender, tall woman, right? And, they're going to all look a certain way. And that's a mentality we've sort of tried to reject, around just runners. The same is true for a lot of running brands. You might see the most, fit runners wearing, a Camelback or one of our competitor products. So again, we've tried to sort of reject that mindset and that mentality towards, especially from a marketing perspective. And one thing that we're going to do is just have people of all colors, all shapes and sizes, all skill sets to be in our campaign and be that spokesperson for Vessel. So that's, that's the long-term vision, but we've just observed that through, our research.
Jalen brings up a really good point that, like we see all these disparities among, people of color in tech. Well, the same thing applies to people of color in the running industry, and so a lot of these brands, to Jalen's points, are primarily targeting your white male, thin elite runner, right? And so we're asking the question like, hey, there's a lot of other runners out here. Why is no one thinking about them? Runners come in all shapes and sizes and abilities. So to Jalen's point, we're really thinking about that too in our design process.
I really wanted to hone in on that deconstruction of the predominantly white space that running is. And I've been noticing a trend in athleisure where they're starting to go towards this different body shapes, different people of color. And I want to kind of ask you guys, how are you guys starting to approach that accessibility? Oftentimes, I've been reading about how running is somewhat inaccessible to people of color, starting from high school even. And how are you guys kind of pivoting the product to start to appeal to a more diverse group?
It's a good thing that you bring that up, because right now we're also in the midst of really just honing in on like our branding strategy and what we want to stand for as a brand, like long term. Even if like once we hire employee number 1, employee number 2, they're going to need to be aware of that. So, the thing that really matters to us and that we really want to make sure is kind of a long-term priority is kind of focus on around 3 things. It's 1, hiring diverse. And I think we're already starting off on a good foot, considering that, I'm a woman, I am, Latinx, I'm, Mexican American, and Jalen, he's Black. And so that's one thing. The other thing too is the marketing, which Jalen touched on, is so like thinking about, hey, is our marketing going to be inclusive? So inclusive marketing, thoughtful marketing around that. And then the design, equitable design is kind of the term that some people are coining, is that, thinking about, hey, is this product, accessible for people of different abilities, of people of different sizes, and even different races. So that, consists of working with different designers who have experience in that space. It consists of like testing your product out on different people of sizes, abilities, colors, etc. All that is really, really important. And that's literally going into our branding strategy right now as we speak. That's something that we've already honed in on. We're like, we want to focus on this from day 1 until eternity,
One thing that I've noticed, because I've been following your guys' company for quite some time, is that you guys are actually doing, kind of boots on the ground type marketing where you're participating in running clubs, you're showing up, you're representing. And I think one thing that we're also kind of discussing is this kind of chicken and egg problem towards accessibility for diverse groups, which is, one is diverse groups are not being marketed to. And then the other one is that they don't have representation in the current use cases in some regards. So I wanted to just kind of hone in, what kind of things do you guys see when you're actually in these groups, and how are things developing and actually changing for the better?
Jalen, do you want to? I feel like I could definitely add to that, but I want to let you go first, maybe.
Yeah, maybe you can hone in on some of the stuff that you're doing to address, or at least close the gap when it comes to diversity in the running space. But for me personally, while I'm not doing much to put myself out there and address that specific issue, one thing I've observed has been the fact that, many running groups, like Mark had mentioned, aren't as diverse as they could be. We were in Colorado last month for just about an entire month. And, we went to a running group, and I know Jasmine went to a couple as well. And, a lot of the times we were the only diverse individuals that were participating and that were there. And it's initially, right, coming into a situation like that, you have to think, it always runs across people's mind, right? Like, am I feeling this way because, I'm Black, or because I'm Mexican, and that, I think that's sort of an internal, conscious bias you have to address. But at the same time, I think the obligation falls on those community leaders and those community owners to bridge the gap, and really break down those barriers, so if they do see people of different colors, different sizes that have chosen to participate in their, group or that activity for that day, they I feel like the obligation falls on them as far as bridging that gap, stepping outside of their comfort zone, making those people feel welcomed, and have a sense of belonging. So I think it's kind of twofold, where yes, we can be just as friendly, right? But I think the obligation also falls on them. So that's what I observed.
Yeah.
But Jasmine, I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about some of the things you're doing in the space.
Yeah. I think that segues perfectly into some of the work that I am doing on the side as well. So, around the same time when Ahmaud Arbery was, killed, it was early last year in 2020. The running industry, obviously he was sadly murdered on a run. And the running industry, which is, by the way, primarily white, primarily male, was like, they opened their eyes. A big part of the industry really was like, oh, what just happened? We need to really open our arms and change this industry right now. And so this organization called the Running Industry Diversity Coalition was started right after that. And it was actually started by Allison Desir and Chris Lempen Crowell. So they're these two incredible people, leaders in the industry. And I actually, got involved with them almost a year ago now. I've been actually helping run their community platform. So what's incredible about this group is that they have probably over like 800 members now, and it's all consists of people in the running industry. So people as in brands. So like think of Saucony, Hoka, even Adidas, Nike, all these running brands, and then your everyday running individual, running leaders, people who are running clubs, things like that, who are coming together and saying, hey, we need to change this industry, having informational, educational workshops, committing to certain things that brands, to change, how brands are also thinking about diversity as well. So that's kind of what the group focuses on. And so I just, I was inspired too with the mission of this group. And so, yeah, I got involved as well. And I've been helping them for, like I said, almost a year now. And that's one way that I really hope to see like the industry is starting to shift in the right way.
That's great. I guess you're putting your time where your intention is, both, within your product and within, the wider running community, which is like, having that social impact. So that is really like, making you and Jalen stand out as founders. And that's really commendable. Yeah. I like that. We've been talking a lot about diversity in this space. And I was just curious to know, like, if you were to look back and give yourself advice, what would that piece of advice be?
I love that question, actually. And not to go totally off topic, but I recently finished this research project that I was working on for about a little over a year with a former professor of mine. And it was actually focused on the Latinx entrepreneurship tech community. So we were interviewing, Latinx individuals, entrepreneurs who are starting tech companies primarily in the Silicon Valley Bay Area. And I would actually ask a similar question too, is like, hey, if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be? And so a lot of this is actually my answer is going to be probably inspired by some of these responses. But one thing that like a lot of these entrepreneurs said is like, accept that you're different and use that different part of you to your advantage. It's like, why be the same? Why look the same? Use what you've experienced, use the struggles that you've had to overcome to your advantage. So that's one thing that, it's okay if you're different.
Embrace
it's exactly embrace the part of you that's different. That's one thing. My big thing too is also just being patient, honestly, and realizing that like startups actually don't happen overnight. And a lot of us, America loves to watch Shark Tank, right? And then they're like, they go on the show and they're like, how much sales have you generated in a year? And if it's like something small, then they're like, what? No deal, And so I'm kind of like, what? Why do we want to scale so quickly? For me as a first-time founder, I want to kind of just I want to grow this company to the pace that I'm growing as an entrepreneur, if that makes sense. So just being patient on that front and learning as I go, I think is also really important. Yeah, that would be a piece of advice I would have given myself even a couple years ago. It's just like not wanting to rush the product, not being feeling this outside pressure that like, hey, I told this person I'm going to launch in this month, or that the product's going to be ready in this month. Just kind of just shutting up all those outside voices. That's definitely some of the advice I would have given myself earlier.
Great piece of advice. How about you, Jalen?
Yeah, I think, looking back, right. I think, one piece of advice and it kind of adds to what Jasmine said, right. Of, it kind of adds to her point. I think if I were to look back, one thing I would tell myself is just to be patient, with myself, and also understand that, everything that is going on is expected, is to be expected, and to roll with the punches. And I think it's easy to, right, Vessel is our baby, and it's easy to really beat up ourselves about, oh my gosh, we haven't launched the product. It's been 3 years, right? But the truth of the matter is, it might have been 3 years since the product has, we've been working on the product and it hasn't launched, but there's been 3 years of marketing. There's been 3 years of learning. There's been 3 years of lessons. There's been so much in between that has been valuable in itself. And I think sometimes when you're in the motions of starting a business, it's, you're always looking forward. But I think where you find a lot of value is just looking back and looking at how far you've come. So I think that is my biggest lesson, is just to be grateful of the process. And, that in itself is, like I said, valuable.
So one thing I did want to talk about is like the commercialization, and you were bringing up Shark Tank, Jasmine, and it's just so funny because now Shark Tank doesn't really look at companies that are like younger than 5 years old. I've actually pitched to Shark Tank, and like it was like a mass pitch, and like everyone was in a convention center, and you sit in front of 5 judges before you even get onto the show, like, and all this other stuff. So it's funny, like you're talking about outside pressure. And, a big thing that you hit on too was mentorship and keeping that good mindset of an entrepreneur. And so part of that is cultural and, something that you learned from your family too, because you're talking again about, the unsung heroes of small business. You grew up around entrepreneurship, but sometimes it's not even phrased as entrepreneurship. And I wanted to talk about another critical phase that a lot of young entrepreneurs and a lot of starting entrepreneurs are going through, which is, garnering that mentorship support, garnering, figuring out how to acquire knowledge that's sound and, helps you actually progress as an entrepreneur. And how you kind of, recruited those people and how you kind of approached those conversations.
Yeah. Another kind of advice that, something that's really just can't help me is the network, that you build through starting, your own company, or just really whatever it is that you do, even if you're not starting a company. Like, just the network is so freaking important. And I'm not saying just like, oh, I have 20,000 connections on LinkedIn. Like, I hate those idiots, I'm sorry.
I have 20,000 connections though, Jasmine.
Those people who literally have that as their bio, like, hey, I have 22,000 plus connections. No. Like, I'm talking about actually like having genuine connections with people, having real relationships, not just like connecting with people for the sake of connecting, like literally following up with them during the pandemic, seeing how they are, sending them gifts during, holidays, things like that. That really has gone a long way for me. And it's because, so many people, like, I don't take for granted all the help that I've gotten from my mentors and just the community as well. So that's been really, really valuable. And for me, really, like, the network started building on when I was in college, when I just got involved in different organizations. I mentioned Ideas was one of them. I eventually became president of that club. So that was also really an awesome way to meet a lot of entrepreneurs. And initially, it was like a lot of my mentors were mentors who were starting their own tech companies. So a lot of the advice that they gave me was more like generic to business. not so specific to the process of design and manufacturing and all that. So I had to kind of go out and seek entrepreneurs who are more in like the outdoor running apparel space, which was challenging at times, but eventually found my way. Actually, that's one of the reasons why we went out to Denver. Is I was like, I know there's a big outdoor and running entrepreneur hub there, and I got to meet some amazing entrepreneurs who are in similar spaces as myself. So just really putting yourself out there, I think, is so important. And you're gonna definitely get some no's here and there, but honestly, you'd be surprised how many people want to help you, and how many people are genuine if they see the genuine person in yourself. So yeah, I really like want to hone in on the importance of having that network early on.
That's great. I feel like, you know, you can learn so much from people, especially that have gone through the motions, and help you sort of like leapfrog over some, you know, initial teething problems that you might hit. So I'm glad that, you're building your community, you're building your support system, and those are the people that will help you, solve problems and, get Vessel to the next level. Yeah. Now, speaking about getting Vessel to the next level, I'm just curious to know, like, what's coming ahead for Vessel down the line. I know we've got this new, you've got this new design with the harness system that's coming out in a few months, but I want to know, like, the big picture growth ideas. Are you thinking other alternative revenue streams? Are you starting to see where else Vessel could apply itself as you grow your brand and as you grow, your reach?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's very exciting because, the point that we talked about earlier, which is that one, just the runners, there's just such a broad range of different types of runners. So I think it's really exciting to see where we could potentially take the design later down the road, is having different products for different styles of runners. But the big vision is that we really want to expand as like an apparel brand. And so right now we're initially going to be launching with the Hydro shirt, which is basically like a short sleeve activewear shirt. But, our idea is eventually doing, expanding on our design line by offering tank tops, your long sleeves, your running jackets, etc. And the concept is like the hydration bladder can be universal to any of those athletic wear tops. So that's the long-term vision. And also it's just like the water wearable space right now around extreme sports is also so exciting. There's this snowboarding brand that I love. I've been using their products for years now, called 686. And about 3 years ago, around the same time when, we had already been working on Vessel, they actually launched a snowboarding jacket called the Hydro Stash. And it's basically the same concept, but for snowboarding. But that just validated the fact that there is a need for hydration in extreme sports. So I think the possibilities are endless. I think we could also eventually one day look at, targeting cyclists or potentially hikers. A lot of hikers also like to run, so it'd be kind of like a 2-in-1. So things like that. I think there's so many opportunities to get creative with our design, with who we want to target. And yeah.
Hey guys, I really want to thank you guys again. I truly appreciate, oftentimes, first time entrepreneurs and people that are really putting in the work, they're masterminds. And I think you guys hit on a lot of different skills of being A, B, C, D, ready to go for any situation that comes to you guys. I truly believe you guys are going to be super successful in the future. And we want to know, for our listeners, is there any kind of media or ways to get in contact with you guys if they want to learn more about your company moving forward?
Yeah, we'll definitely check out our website. Right now we need to, I can't wait, like I said earlier, I can't wait to get our new samples so we can update our website with some new content. But check out our website, vesselathletics.com. You can also, connect with me on Instagram at the Jazz Runs. So the JAS Runs. And then I'm also, of course, on, we have our own Vessel Athletics Instagram page. Jalen, I don't know if you want to share your places to connect.
Yeah. Feel free to find me at all of the pages that Jasmine mentioned. But in addition, if you all would like to personally connect with me, feel free to follow me at the J Outdoors. So THEJAY Outdoors.
Thanks again, guys, for coming on to Cool Fucking Tech. Really appreciate it.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jacinda.